I wanted to make this particular video as less of a news piece, because typically this would be something like that, and more so an editorial kind of thing, more of an opinion piece like you'd find in a car magazine or an online article, because although for the most part I've avoided talking on the channel about the crazy a couple of weeks that it's been for Jaguar, I spoke of course last time about Jaguar's forthcoming new concept, about some of the news we had of 3 new models, etc., but at that point we hadn't even seen the new logo yet, let alone the crazy ad which they did, which to me looks like Jag is now an organic yogurt brand rather than a car brand. Now of course we've seen the full concept, the Type 00, but as far as the car itself, I actually don't have the thoughts which you might expect. See, I'm not going to say that I like this trajectory for Jaguar, and although I do wish them the best, and I hope that it turns out well for them, because it would be a shame for them to go under, I do definitely think that there are some very misguided things here. I'm not necessarily talking about making it pink or having a crazy ad which doesn't even have a car in it. I think more so it's just this design style has some innate pitfalls when it comes to it being recognised as a Jaguar. Because if you really think about it, if you step back and look at car design as what it really is for the most part, car design is all about one thing: marketing. You want people to recognise what your brand is. It's why so many companies, the vast majority of companies in fact, have a very distinctive design language or design style across all of their different models. And of course the prime example of that is a badge or a grille design which makes you immediately recognise what that car is. That brings me to my first problem with the Jaguar Type 00, because on its surface I actually quite like the design. I don't like the choice of colour, because to me just like a flat silver would have looked like a cooler idea. Black probably would have been too understated for this one because you'd have missed out on the details, what few of them there are, but I think something like a clean satin silver would have looked better than the soft pink. As it is, it kind of gives me the remake of the Thunderbirds vibe of that Ford which they built for that movie, which in its own right is a cooler car than this in my opinion. But this particular design, it's not bad. It's actually very striking, but it reminds me of a couple of things put together. For one, and I'll put this on screen, it really reminds me of a Melling Hellcat, particularly from the side. And of course the Melling never actually reached production, but it's a striking similarity to me in terms of the overall chiseled block GT kind of shape which it has. In addition to that, for me, by far the weakest angle on this car is the back end, not because it's ugly, but because the grille in particular, that air conditioning unit looking back end, just looks like, well, quite literally an afterthought. I think the front end, the lights, look quite nice. The side profile is fantastic, and I could imagine seeing one in person, and it would look incredible. That also is something I want to revisit later in this video in terms of what I would have recommended or done, for what that's worth, if I were asked or tasked with rebranding Jaguar. One of the biggest issues I have though, and I don't really understand how this kind of missed the QC stage, if you will, for Jaguar, is that certain things don't look the same from a distance as they do up close. And this is where I in particular take issue with the rebranding of Jaguar. See, getting rid of the Leaper I think is a dubious decision. They've done it though, so it doesn't really matter what we think, it's already a done thing. I do think that the new J circular logo is just straight up dumb. The word Jaguar is fine, because we've had that for quite a while. Changing it to upper and lower case is a bit dumb, but the word itself is nothing fundamentally new. That's always been written on the back of a Jaguar. The problem that I have is having that written across the front. That's the key difference, which Jaguars have never done before. Because if you look at any Jag, classic or modern, you always have Jaguar written across the rear and the little Leaper either on the bonnet or the circular logo, sometimes both, on the front end. The problem now is, I would argue, and you could try this yourself, take a picture, look at that logo on the front grille, especially in conjunction with the colour, the shape, in particular the lights, forget that it says Jaguar, and I would argue that if you took a fleeting glance at the front of this car, it in fact doesn't look like a Jaguar, it doesn't look like a Jaguar logo, it looks like an Audi badge. Because at first glance, all you see is a bunch of small, very close together circular objects, which kind of looks like the Auto Union logo that became famous as Audi. When you run with that idea, this entire car could quite easily be an Audi. If you made it more of a satin silver, put the 4 rings on the front, well, I'll show you a couple of reasons why to me this looks very Audi-ish, including stuff like the Nuvolari and in particular the Rosemeyer. This is a very Audi-looking thing to do in my opinion, and I can't be the only one who thinks that way. Another thing which I'd like to say about this design, which I think could have been a ironically nice tie-in to another news piece which I did, was I of course talked about a return of, or potential return, of another British icon, much smaller than Jaguar, much more bespoke, much more exclusive, but one which many fans of the quite a few people who watched that news piece video didn't like this one particular thing, which is that they also want to be brought back as an electric car. And that was of course Bristol. The funny thing is, I actually think this car could have worked as a Bristol. Because if you were to put a different front end on it, a different grille, something more Bristol-esque, I actually think the shape really would work as a Bristol. It has that crazy, wacky, super long bonnet, sloping down back end, big, chiseled, muscular vibe of something like a Bristol Blenheim or a Bristol 411 or whatever else. It has, to me, a very modern-day Bristol kind of look to it, or rather like a 2035 Bristol, if you will. To me, that highlights the point which I keep going back to, which is that if you can liken it to a Melling Hellcat, to an Audi, to a Bristol, but not to a Jaguar, this doesn't necessarily seem like a good point in terms of its design marketing itself as being something where people will see it and think, wow, I want to buy a Jag now, because that is fundamentally what the purpose of a car design is. In the case of this car, not only is Jaguar trying to make you want one, they in fact really, really need you to want one, because they've put a lot of time, a lot of money, and a huge amount of risk into hoping that this new idea and this new trajectory works. And maybe it will, because in my opinion, you give this thing 1,000 horsepower, which is roughly what it's going to have, doubtless tremendous performance, and ultimately we will have to see what the road-going version looks like, because at this point, if it looks nothing like the concept, then this makes this whole thing an exercise in futility even more so than it already seems to be. But let's say it somehow ends up looking like this on the road. Well, in that case, it still kind of comes off as almost jumping on the Tesla Cybertruck bandwagon. It looks like Jaguar's trying to cash in on that love it or hate it, crazy cyberpunk, can't avoid talking about it sort of design like the Cyberpunk had. To me, that's just a really risky choice, because yes, you'll have some fans, but it also means that loads of people are really rooting for the vehicle's downfall. Just look at how many people love to dog on the Tesla Cybertruck every time one of them fails. In the case of this Jaguar, which I almost just called an Audi again, I really do hope for Jaguar's success in this endeavour, but I don't hope for it in the way that they seem to be pushing. I couldn't care less about this whole organic yogurt look which they've got now, because it's tacky. It comes across as desperate, to be honest. It doesn't come across as something which they actually believe. It comes across as about a decade late to a bandwagon which people are either already on or don't care about. So you're not really going to win anyone new over by appealing to this we're inclusive now kind of vibe. The point of a luxury car is quite literally the opposite. See, this is the reason why the marketing and the design of this car is even dumber than it initially seems. Initially, it seems very tacky, very in your face, and very garish. The problem is, all of those things do not market you as inclusive. It ironically markets you as being the kind of people which you'd see in a movie like The Hunger Games, being represented as the elite bad guys. These comical, clown-looking individuals with so much money that they don't even know what to do with it. And sure, that is technically the kind of fan base and the kind of buyer base which Jaguar needs to afford to make these cars, quite literally. You need people who are big spenders, high rollers, but also somehow the kind of people who have enough money that they don't care about having that traditional old money vibe of a Rolls or a Bentley. The irony is, in my opinion, that if you were to look back about 20 years to the mid-2000s, yes, that was 20 years ago already, a car like a Maybach was considered to be the most garish choice out of those ultimate luxury vehicles, but a Maybach now suddenly seems like the more level-headed approach out of all of those vehicles, which is crazy how things change. Now, I don't fault Jaguar for trying a new thing, but that does bring me to my idea. Of course, it's not worth anything because I'm not in a position of power, I don't have the funding to do it, and ultimately who really cares, and it's not like Jaguar are ever going to be interested in my opinion. I would, however, like to put out, just for the sake of it and just for the fun, what I would have liked to have seen, or what, if I had the power to do so, I would have done in this scenario. See, if I were tasked with reinventing the Jaguar brand, an immediate thing came to mind for me. Even if you stick to the same goals which they currently have, my approach to reinventing Jaguar would have been this. Imagine the timeline were exactly the same, a huge gap between their most recent vehicle, the Jaguar XJ. So what I would have done is not only combined the actual underpinnings and the actual history of Jaguar with this more modern age kind of styling which they have these days, because let's be honest, it took most of us, myself included, kind of a while to get used to the X351, the most recent XJ, because it was a very different looking car to the much more traditional Sovereign or Daimler kind of style XJs, for example, which came before it. I would have let things go quiet for a good long while, as they did, and then I would have done a similar announcement, announcing that there's a forthcoming Jaguar concept car and that we are reinventing the brand as something which both goes back to our roots in terms of being iconic, peerless, a vehicle which doesn't try to copy anything else other than its own legacy. A vehicle which ties into the beauty, to the panache, to the legendary past which it came from in terms of being so good of a luxury car, so timeless of a British icon that even the Queen would ride in one rather than a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce. And then bring that to modern times with the kind of modern advantages in build quality, which you can have. The Jaguar Land Rover Group have had some issues with that, but it's not like cars can't be built better. It is a choice where you prioritise your funds, and clearly they were making some wrong decisions, particularly in the case of Range Rovers. But to go back to my point, what I would have done is I would have released a single black and white silhouette, a side view, just a profile of the car from the side, bathed in shadow. Clearly a large, opulent luxury car, which again ties into exactly what they were trying to do and what they are still trying to do. A vehicle which you could justifiably pay Bentley flying spur prices of the 2000s on, but in today's era, a £120,000, £130,000 Jaguar, which has virtually no peers. And there is a key reason why this idea could succeed. The whole point of a Jaguar was always that it was an interesting alternative to the far more expensive Rolls-Royce, Bentleys, Daimlers, etc., but it had that unique twist of combining a sporting image with that luxury. Much like how Bentley undercuts Rolls-Royce with their performance, Jaguar kind of did the same thing to Bentley and Rolls-Royce and various other brands as well. Almost like a little bit of a mishmash of Aston Martin and Bentley put together, but with, for the most part, and here's a huge key, more affordable prices and more affordable to live with. They're not cheap cars, but they are more affordable than many of their peers. And if you were to make my idea, or even as they already are doing, around a £130,000 car, well, it's opulent enough to feel special, but that is a massive price cut over something like a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, and that is a huge extra slice of the market which you can appeal to. So again, that's one of the few things which I agree with their trajectory on. Now we get to the cherry on the cake. I would have announced this car first of all in silhouette form, and I would very much be inspired by an existing vehicle which unfortunately Jaguar actually rejected the concept for. And the particular marketing strategy which I would have taken is initially release that silhouette, like I said. Then a few months, a few weeks, however long down the line, I would have released a badge. The badge would not have been Jaguar's reinvented badge because, aside from perhaps softening the Jaguar logo, making it a little cleaner, more modern and crisp, I would have kept the leaper. I would have kept the Jaguar logo in word form exactly untouched, and perhaps just made it a little bit more monochromatic, but kept the same exact shape. Less plasticky chrome, more modern, clean, matte, if you will. And that brings me to phase 2. That logo, which I would have released, would not have been anything to do with the Jaguar brand itself. It would have been the car, because my rebrand of Jaguar would have been to release one new car, not an SUV, a luxury limo, and a GT. I would have made all of this focused in on one single central point, and that point would have been to release the name Sovereign, just the word Sovereign, bathed in a black shadowed background, and then combined with that long slab-like silhouette shape. As we approach the time that we're in now of the official release and unveiling of the concept car, what would have been unveiled would have been inspired by, I believe, the Bertone B99, I think it was called, which, as I alluded to, Jaguar themselves unfortunately rejected years and years ago. But again, this is me in control rather than who are a Jaguar, and I would have made a more modern interpretation of this kind of design. To me, a Jaguar of this level needs to be undeniable, unmistakable. It needs to simultaneously be a car which is clearly a Jaguar, but also a vehicle which you want. Not because you need one, and this goes into their own marketing, but because you want one. Again, something we do agree on. Except the difference would be, you wouldn't want one because it looks like some kind of spaceship out of Blade Runner. You'd want one because it looks simultaneously like every iconic Jaguar XJ and Sovereign all rolled into one, but also a vehicle which is so clearly way upmarket compared to what the XJ has been for about 20 years. See, I love the XJs with diesel engines, XJR versions. They're fantastic cars. Genuinely, some of the most enjoyable driving experiences I've ever had have been in XJs. particularly around the mid-2000s in the X350 and X350 form. And the reason why I love it so much is one of the reasons why I would release this car in this particular way, and that is that those cars are almost the perfect combination of old Jaguar and new Jaguar. You have the classic look, the classic feel of the switchgear, that upright grille, the clunky door closing, just everything feels and looks like a retro 60s or 70s Jaguar. Chrome lines, pinstriping, big wheels set out on all four corners of the car, a long American-style boot, that unmistakable gangster kind of shape. Iconic vehicles. But combine that with modern advantages in engineering, far superior build quality, better production values, a vehicle which is double the price of the most recent XJ, but justifies every penny of that by being built not to the standard of a Bentley, but better than the standard of a Bentley. And when I say build it better, I don't mean put diamonds in the headrests. I mean actually put all of that development cost into making the car an undeniable car. Undeniable in terms of reliability, in terms of build quality, in terms of every single button, switch, every single door close, having that satisfying feel, a clunk. Make everything about the car feel like an ASMR journey. The kind of thing which Mercedes themselves put a huge amount of development into. How the car smells, how the buttons feel, making sure everything has a satisfying feeling. That is what you want from a car like this. And ultimately, many owners of those XJs and top-tier Jaguars actually don't care quite as much about performance. And let's say you still went down the route of electric, because to some degree I feel like that would probably be out of my control, but let's say I had the option. Well, it's difficult to say what route I would go down, but it almost certainly wouldn't be electric if I had the choice. Not because I hate electric cars, but because I think there just isn't much of a future in it, as long as battery tech keeps holding us back. And ultimately, it's my strong belief that electric cars are going to be like the next diesels in terms of the government's really pushing it and then backtracking it severely, saying, well, it's not quite as good as we initially thought, blah, blah, blah. Except the problem is, diesels will keep going for decades because they're just simpler and can take more of a beating and are for the most part really good cars. Whereas electric cars, the batteries wear out, they catch fire, as Jaguar's own I-Pace has been again recalled for, and various other issues which just aren't going away, despite billions of dollars and pounds and everything else being poured into all of these rebrandings. So let's say it was electric. Give it essentially the same drivetrain as what they've got here. I mean, make it a 1,000 horsepower all-wheel drive torque vectoring monster if you want to, but it wouldn't really matter. For the same reason why it doesn't really matter if a Rolls-Royce Phantom has a 450 horsepower V12. Yes, it does have a 450 horsepower V12 in around 2005 form, but do you think anyone who actually bought one really cared about that? That wasn't really the point. The only reason why Rolls-Royce ever has a V12 is to make it smooth. It's not ultimately about more performance, nor was it back in the day when stuff like Lincoln's in the Zephyr form had a V12 engine. It's because that having more cylinders means that an engine is better balanced and runs more smoothly. Performance came after. So in an ideal world, of course, I would love the idea of making this essentially Jaguar's equivalent to the Cadillac 16 concept, one of my favourite cars of all time and by far my favourite concept car ever. Realistically, of course, we're never going to have a V16 Jaguar in 2025, but I think that even with a traditional combustion engine, or probably what I would try and do, something like hydrogen tech, which may have meant delaying the car more, but let's be honest, BMW and Toyota have been making hydrogen cars, concept forms, and even drivable vehicles for quite some time now. BMW, in fact, has that one concept car which looks like a shark, that super aerodynamic one. I don't recall the name, but I'll show it on screen, which has flown up the Goodwood Hill, sounds incredible, and it's a fully functioning car, at least in terms of its performance, not in terms of, having aircon and everything, but you know what I mean. Put that kind of money, instead of making 3 different platforms, into just this one. Focus everything on this being Jaguar's triumphant return. And not just a return, a reinvention. Bringing the Sovereign, not even call it the XJ, just name it the Jaguar Sovereign, and refer to it as the Sovereign. Make it clear, we are not here to be an alternative. We are here because this is what you want. This is the Sovereign. And even though it wouldn't say the on the car, that is what you would want people to refer to it as. And crucially, it would be justified in being referred to as that. Make it an undeniable car, a peerless vehicle, not because it's not as good as a Rolls-Royce, but because a Rolls-Royce cannot compete on price. Make a Jaguar the better alternative, the clear alternative, rather than just another alternative. To me, that is what I would have done with Jaguar's rebranding, whether it was electric, hydrogen, traditional engine, whatever the case may be. And then my plan ultimately would have been, after generating this huge amount of buzz, which this one already is, not even in a positive way, and of course I'm biased, but I think my way would have got a lot more positive buzz. And then, down the line, let's say it were electric, you can quite easily evolve that same platform into a couple of other versions, but the reason why I would want to focus on a single car first is for the exact same reason as the Phantom. If you look at Rolls-Royce now, they've got a few different cars. They've had the Wraith, the Ghost, the Phantom, the Cullinan, but in the 2000s that wasn't the case. You didn't need all of those. And it was nothing to do with whether or not there was a market. It was to do with making it a singular focal point. Make it the Rolls-Royce. Don't make it a Rolls-Royce. Make this the Jaguar, not a Jaguar. That is, for what it's worth, and just for the fun of it, what I would have done to release a new Jaguar, a reinvented Jaguar, something which, unlike what they're doing, actually pays respect to the brand's history rather than just reinventing it by what seems to be a group of people who don't really care about the legacy of the brand. They just want to kind of use a powerful platform to push their own agenda, which is really what Jaguar feels like it's doing at the moment. You've got to at least give people something that reminds them of what they loved before. They might accept electric if they have to, as long as you can keep it as traditional as possible. And if you're willing to try something different like hydrogen or ideally synthetic fuels, which aren't really an option yet, I think that would do even better. Because unlike electric, those things aren't going to explode randomly, catch fire while you're charging them, or just ultimately die somewhere because you don't want to fit a new battery to a car which now isn't worth half of what it was when new anyway. How would you have done it, or what do you think of my idea? And also, of course, now that we've finally talked about this whole rebrand and the new logos and the new concept car, what do you think? Do you like the new direction? Do you perhaps agree with my take? A cool car, but just not a Jaguar, perhaps? That's it for my thoughts. I wanted to put them all together into one video, and I'll see you in future with more. But for now, thanks for watching.